You know, guys, since I was planning on returning to this show, since I started Cartoon Crisis 3, it's really fitting to review an episode that centers around one of the reasons onto why episodes like these have been banned from networks. Mainly because it was too vulgar. And to tell you the truth, when you use that term towards this episode and how poorly aged it is after 16 years, yeah. This episode, The Butt of the Jake, is the worst episode in the entire series. I have never watched this episode when it aired in the end of August and in the beginning of September because it only aired 2 times on Cartoon Network until it was banned due to the inappropriate nature of Jake's obsession with his butt. And to tell you the truth, it's honestly surprising that it took this long for the people at Cartoon Network to realize that an episode like this is way over the top and way more painful to sit through. Like, I'm gonna be totally real with you. Whenever people are going to think of the worst from this show, they're always going to remember not only from this episode, but mainly Jake's character. And since this is the first time I'm gonna be talking about his character and his obsession with his wheel, they weren't thinking clearly when they were trying to make this episode way too hard on being too funny. All it did is just did it for the wrong reasons that we're familiar with. But to tell you the truth, this really just gave me the impression that they just wanted an episode centering around Jake, with him carrying the episode. But the thing is, you can't always carry the entire episode when all you're doing is making the episode worse. If it wasn't obvious at this point, the plot of this episode is Jake's obsession with his butt, and Adam is just trying to stop his obsession. But unfortunately, no matter what, Jake is so obsessed with his butt to the point that I just don't get it. Like, he's a monkey and monkeys have weird butts, but the thing is, it just doesn't make a good episode out of it when it's literally about Jake just being obsessed with his butt. Like, I know I didn't watch the show a lot, especially since this is the second episode that I'm reviewing from this show, which is Cartoon Crisis related. But to tell you the truth, the fact that we're supposed to find Jake humorous in this and just expect his obsession with his butt to be normal because he's a monkey, then no. Especially since that in the final minutes of this episode, it just really feels like this episode is glorifying monkey butts. But we're gonna get to that much later. In the middle of the episode, Jake uses helium to grow his butt bigger, I'm not kidding, which grew the attention in the city to the point that they actually enjoy it. For me personally, if it's either the fact that they just didn't see what it is due to it being blocking the sun, which makes it difficult for them to see it when it's black, and the fact that it's mainly out of coincidence that they easily did this joke for the sake of just having Jake get some admiration. And to tell the truth, Blue did admiration from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends much more better, and the fact that character was really hateable. And the thing is, the difference between Jake and Blue is the fact that Jake is literally being crazy because he is an animal. And the excuse from Foster's is mainly the fact that Blue is imaginary and he made out of imaginary from a 3-year-old until Mac turned 8. Which kind of makes sense for that type of behavior. And the way I see Jake behave in this show, it really feels like they can easily get away with anything, all because he's an animal. And he's being treated differently as an animal by being in a school full of different animals. But I'm gonna be real with you guys. The setting of Adam being in a school with different animals is supposed to be the major plot point of his surroundings. I get that. But the thing is, knowing full well that Jake is literally the only character who is being way more obnoxious in comparison to his other friends, I honestly found it difficult to believe that these two characters were ever friends. And even if this is Adam just trying to understand the nature of the school that he got transferred in comparison to his regular school, it doesn't change the fact that he is way more emotionless when it comes to Jake taking advantage of him, and the fact that Jake landed on his face with his butt after landing from 1,000 feet after his butt air balloon got popped. Let me just say this right now, the fact that Adam is a lot more emotionless, it really shows that people just don't remember this character due to how he's being portrayed. Like, I know this is before Lincoln and the other characters got tortured when it comes to how they were developed and how they were put into the situations that were either their fault or not, but believe me when I say this, I just don't even understand how Adam is willing to put up with anything that Jake put him through. Especially this moment right here. The final minutes of this episode just showcases on why monkeys are pretty much the most hated thing because of this episode. It's because Dr. Babuski stated that there's nothing wrong of liking your butt. And to tell you the truth, since that he's a monkey, I'm gonna be really real with you. If this was a different doctor, he or she would have had different answers on the situation, because for me personally, this episode just makes me convinced that monkeys are a lot more obnoxious rather than normal animals. Believe me, like, let's be perfectly real with you. If we were living in an alternative world where this episode never got banned and we witnessed this episode multiple times and just realize of how it's normal to like butts, if you're a monkey that is, then this episode isn't really a magnum opus on Jake's character. It's literally the magnum opus of his demise of any credibility that he has. I don't even understand why this episode's ideal on making butts humorous as the major highlight, because for me personally, it really feels like they're just trying way too hard to have Jake be way more comically relieved while carrying the episode, but all they're doing is doing the opposite of any of those things. The entire episode focusing on Jake's wheel, which is supposed to be the joke throughout the entire episode, then no, because for me personally, animals have boundaries when it comes to taking them a little seriously, and when you completely make an episode out of it, I'm starting to get convinced that they took the fans' advice when it comes to what they like from Jake, but not for the reasons that they expected, mainly his wheel. And believe me when I say this, it really makes sense onto why this episode hasn't aired in other channels after being banned from Cartoon Network after being aired twice. And don't even get me started on the fact that Jake makes a speech in front of his peers who are monkeys, and after the speech, they just do things with their butts, and let's be real. Let's be perfectly real with you. This is pretty much the driving point onto why people cannot stand this show, and it destroys any credibility of what this show has, because this moment makes us forget everything else of anything positive from this show. This is beyond vulgar, to the point that it crossed the line way too far, and Cartoon Network was lucky enough to ban this episode after it aired twice on their channel back at the day. Granted, this show wasn't popular at the day, but that's probably for the best, because of stuff like this. If you really want my expression of what I feel about this, is that this is beyond glorified. Like, I always criticize glorified a lot, but this takes the cake. And it's honestly a lot more difficult to see this again, knowing full well that it will never air on television, and even though we may see it on streaming services, possibly, if the show is ever on a streaming service or on a pirate website, but once you see this moment, there's no turning back on what you feel about this show if you're a newcomer. Believe that. And don't even get me started on the principal doing butt clinches. This just instantly beats a dead horse, and it really makes this episode way more vulgar than it needs, and the fact that the principal is a frog and not a monkey. You're literally killing the butt jokes way too much before it died down years later. Guys, when I made my first episode review from this show 3 years ago as part of Cartoon Crisis 2, I was harsh on it, but to tell you the truth, I was just trying to focus on doing as much as possible for Cartoon Crisis 2 3 years ago, to the point that I would have probably made it a lot more complicated if I reviewed this episode 3 years ago, but even reviewing it right now, it was so uncomfortable no matter what. I know I haven't watched more of this show aside from the 2 episodes, but my expectations are really low. I just think that at this point, this show just didn't grow on me as much as the other Cartoon Network shows, and just by watching this episode for the first time, it really gave me the impression that this show just isn't worth it for my time and my consideration on reviewing more episodes from it. Let's be real, not every single cartoon is gonna be on my to-do or to-watch list. It's not always going to be the case. But that's mostly for the best. If anything, this episode only gave me the impression that monkeys aren't really perfect and they're mostly obnoxious. But I blame Jake for that. I'm giving this episode a 1 out of 10.